Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Good to see you again, Eric.
Hey, Bob, here we go. And folks, we got a lot of stuff we're going to try to get to. It's basically in keeping with stories we've been covering in the past. Organically, it's all related, right, Bob?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, a lot to go over,
yes,
and a lot happening as we tape.
When we air on Monday, it'll be basically 1 week, maybe 9-10 days from the opening of the new National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I always have to make sure I get that in the correct order because the acronym that comes up is something like NMAAHC.
Right. It's something we're not quite used to yet. We will be.
Right. But it's going to be up there. It's being hashtagged all over, and so
right.
that's going to be instantly recognizable acronym. But the word, what have you heard, Bob? Because I've been seeing some really good things about that museum.
I mean, I've been looking at the Twitter feed from people we both know. In fact, you were dining with a few of them a couple days ago.
NYABG, yes.
And they all had good things to say about it. I remember when they were first getting some of the artifacts from different people, and they were asking people, can we have this or can we have this on loan? And when I looked at what was planned to be there, I was astonished that so much of it would end up in the museum. So I've heard good things.
Yeah, and I've seen some really, really interesting stuff. And I know Greg Tait ran some seriously great commentaries on his Facebook feed that were just outstanding for just pure graphic, phenomenal writing. And I know personally a couple of journalist friends. I know Lelia Bundles, our longtime colleague.
Okay.
Madam C.J. Walker's granddaughter, great-granddaughter or granddaughter, she sent some stuff into the museum from her line. So, there are a lot of really great things in that museum. One of the key things, though, that I've noticed on the root site, which let me quote it properly, is Emmett Till's casket is one of our most sacred objects at African American History Museum. And of course, for people of our generation, and I'm a little bit older than Bob, the Emmett Till assassination in Money, Mississippi. Yeah, that's what it was. It was murder. A young 15-year-old black boy gets shot for looking at, eyeballing, maybe whistling at a white woman. And of course, that basically was the latest trigger that jump-started the modern civil rights movement.
And not just shot, beaten so badly, and his mother made a point of making sure there was an open casket at his funeral, just so that the general public could see what those folks had done to him. So it was and a lot of newspapers at that time surprisingly ran the photo.
Yes.
And it was
quite graphic for the times.
A watershed moment, both for journalism and the civil rights movement. And the fact that casket made it into the collection is fantastic, because we were chatting before we went on air. For years, that casket was ignored and allowed to basically disintegrate in the corner of a storage room. Well, forgotten, but I'm just happy
forgotten,
to say.
Now right where it should be. And of course, the museum's opening, the long arc of it getting to where it is, of course, is near and dear to all African Americans. But for me, I find it highly significant because I call it the proximate, most significant trigger that culminated in this museum actually having been open 8-9 days ago, on the 24th of September, was the rediscovery of the New York African Burial Ground in Lower Manhattan, right here in Lower Manhattan. Back in 1991, all those bones started to come up. And when we started digging into that history, lo and behold, a whole new paradigm on what slavery was all about in these United States. Because guess what? All 13 colonies had practiced slavery.
Absolutely.
And this burial ground was the resting place for 10, possibly as many as 20,000 formerly enslaved and free Africans that were buried right down there in Manhattan in that what's now the practically heart of the financial federal district. but it was rediscovered in 91, which makes 2016 the 25th anniversary of the rediscovery of the burial ground. And that site is now under the auspices of the National Park Service. They are celebrating their 100th anniversary in 2016.
Right.
And Superintendent McKinney is making sure that as part of the 25th anniversary of the burial ground, the 100th anniversary of the Park Service, and this week, and when we air this week, which is actually the 13th anniversary of the return and reburial of those bodies that had been taken out of that burial ground for study. They went to Howard University, they were scientifically examined. There's a myriad of material on that examination. I believe much of it is up on the National Park Service African Burial Ground website. And if you want to dig into some of that stuff, you can go to that site and see it. But they're going to be celebrating that 13th anniversary of the Return and Reburial this week. And as part of that celebration on Wednesday, October 5th, part 1 of Then I'll Be Free to Travel Home, The Legacy of the New York African Burial Ground, will be screened at 6 p.m. Down at that burial ground site, 290 Broadway, Lower Manhattan. Near and dear to my heart because I managed to get the incomparable Lena Horne to be the on-camera talent for that telling of that historical arc of who those Africans were, who discovered that, who built that burial ground, who lived, worked, and actually made this country what it is. And then the following night, at 6 p.m., part 2, the battle to save and preserve the African burial ground, which was a 13-year epic struggle between the community and the federal government, General Services Administration. We captured that as well, and that will be screened at 6 p.m. on Thursday, October 6th. And so all you folks who did not get a chance to get down to the opening of the National Museum on the Mall on September 24th, comes to the location, which is now a National Historical Monument, the burial ground site.
It's easy enough to get to. It's just above City Hall area, just above Chambers Street, the entrance being on Broadway, like you said, 290 Broadway. And it's apropos that these celebrations would be going on now, because I remember the big celebration they had when the artifacts and the bones were brought back. That was quite, was it like a week-long celebration?
They marched those bodies up from Washington, D.C. They came up the East Coast, and they stopped in different locations, and then they had the crossing across the Hudson River. Maybe symbolic of the crossing of the ocean, but they crossed the Hudson. They came back to the site, and there were all kinds of ceremonial performances, which basically we captured, and much of it is in parts of the documentary, and definitely the radio documentary series that we did.
And if nothing else, I'll just suggest that people see it just to understand how much work went into saving the burial ground and how the government initially just ignored the requests of the people to do anything with it other than put a plaque and then build above it. That's what the federal government wanted to do. They wanted to just
shovel the bones out, build their buildings.
Put pilings down and put the building up. So now we have the courthouse, of course, but we have the sacred ground.
You have the biggest sarcophagus in the world, is what I call it, because the building that they build on the edge of that burial ground is a giant tombstone. It services the area,
quite well.
Federal offices, but it's marking who those ancestors were. So
very well done.
So make sure you don't miss either of those screenings. Come to both of them. There'll be celebrations on the 5th, 6th, and 7th. As soon as I get more info, a full breakdown on the actual drumming, dancings, and all that stuff that will go on during the daytime, not just evening screenings, I'll make sure we post it on our Facebook site we'll try to send out a blast. And I don't know, Bob, maybe we need to get a blog site for Media Watch so we can follow up.
It might. And if we can get the archive up fast enough, maybe we'll mention it on YouTube as well.
Okay, sounds like a winner. But you talk about that historical arc, what's being shown at that phenomenal museum in Washington, D.C., what's actually being shown at that site in Lower Manhattan, because the Arc of Return, that Rodney Leon memorialization that's down in Lower Manhattan, that in itself is worth visiting and seeing right there behind 290 Broadway. So that whole transatlantic, that whole United Nations connection, that whole global connection of that African diasporic journey, this is currently being celebrated in that museum, being celebrated here in New York, and so much for the positive side of the celebratory parts of the history.
And I just want to mention that for those who haven't made it down to the museum yet, there's an app available which I recently found, and you could do some research before you go down there.
Okay.
But didn't mean to.
That's a good point, because I think C-SPAN covered the opening of the museum. And if you have a link to their online site, you may still be able to screen some of the stuff that they actually covered.
It is archived.
There you go. There we go. So, because we don't have quite the technical director capability that we normally have, we can't roll any of that in for you for this show.
At least not today.
Not today. But in any event, to segue to the not so positive side, United Nations, which actually has listed that burial ground in Lower Manhattan as one of their world sites. The United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent published a study that concludes that Black Americans are entitled to reparatory justice. Now, this is a report that they filed last Monday. When this airs, it'll be the preceding Monday. And let me quote from the report. Because
now, is that the one our colleague?
Yes, one of our resource individuals, Joy Elliott,
yes.
A great Media Watch resource person, made sure she brought this to our attention.
Yes,
and we need to credit our resource people. But once I opened this, I said, we got to bring this to the attention of the folk. Basically, the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, which reports to the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, presented its findings to the UN Human Rights Council on last Monday. And the panel, which visited the U.S. on a fact-finding mission in January of 2016, wrote in a statement that it was extremely concerned about the human rights situation of African Americans. That's a quote, stating that there has been no real commitment to reparations, truth, and reconciliation for people of African descent. And continues, despite substantial changes since the end of the enforcement of Jim Crow and the fight for civil rights, ideology ensuring the domination of one group over another continues to negatively impact the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights of African Americans today. The dangerous ideology of white supremacy inhibits social cohesion amongst the U.S. population. The panel likened the patterns of police officers killing unarmed Black men to lynching, which it referred to as a form of, quote, racial terrorism that has contributed to a legacy of racial inequality that the U.S. must address.
Interesting. So they brought it right up to today.
It's basically today, and I'm suspicioning last year, the December 12th movement.
Okay.
They took a petition to the United Nations demanding this type of investigation be made of the treatment of Black people in America. And I'm guessing, I think they took that petition in September of 2015.
Okay.
And I'm guessing that here we are in September of 2016 and this report comes out.
Right.
I'm guessing, don't have proof, but if you read the report and you go back to what they had requested.
Well, I mean, I'm not familiar with entirely how the UN works, but I would bet that request was sent to that committee, and given that the UN just ended its session, the week before we tape here.
Mm-hmm.
This committee probably reported to the full session
just before the session ended.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we have here. Obviously, linking it to what's happening today, for the sake of the press release, whatever they sent out.
Yeah, the interesting thing is couple of key phrases. The panel noted the African Americans are disproportionately affected by, quote, tough on crime policies,
Right.
mass incarceration, and racial bias and disparities in the criminal justice system.
And we're talking about an international committee.
That's right.
Yeah.
And a committee that, you know, they don't live here, they don't have any axe to grind. They
Absolutely.
basically,
Right.
Some of the members might live here, but some of the other members don't.
And they're funded by no one.
They're not funded by,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
unless it's our tax dollars that are contributed to the upkeep of the UN.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes our tax dollars actually get used properly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's if we actually paid, because the U.S. was behind, as you know. But that's a separate story.
Yeah, but we could segue from that last quote on that report to the recent presidential debate
Right.
between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, because tell me a little bit about Trump's position on the tough on crime phrase that these people just
Well,
what was his?
He keeps saying that African Americans are the ones most affected by the crime wave, and that by itself is the reason why we need to be tough on crime, as he likes to put it. And we need to enhance things like stop and frisk, and we need to support our law officers and whatever they do. I'm trying to pull out one of his key quotes, but you know, sort of a blanket approval for what they need to do when they need to do it.
Well,
and that's what bothered me about what he kept pressing in the debate.
Oh yeah. The thing that got me was his yes, and that's why we must definitely use stop and frisk. He came right out and used the phrase stop and frisk, and the moderator Lester Holt, who did not interrupt too often, did say that was declared unconstitutional.
Right. Yes.
And what did Donald Trump respond?
He said no, it wasn't. I mean, all of a sudden he was the authority, and which he most of the time is not, because he doesn't do any research.
Right. Well, of course, Lester Holt said, no, you're wrong. It
Yes.
was declared unconstitutional, but of course Trump talked all over him again.
Trump talked about the judge being
a non-friendly to the police
yes,
judge.
Exactly.
And so that's why she ruled that way, but it was constitutional, basically.
I mean,
but that's what he said.
That's what he said. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, that was just one of the few of many moments during that debate that made me sag in my seat as I listened to Mr. Trump.
The reason we knew he was wrong was because Media Watch dissected.
Oh yeah, we had
stop and frisk. We talked about Judge Scheinling's ruling when she came down with it, and how she parsed exactly what was right, what was wrong, and came down with, and this part is definitely unconstitutional. You got to go back to the drawing board.
Right.
So we knew that he was lying, and Hillary Clinton knew he was lying and actually called him on it on the spot, and Lester Holt knew he was lying and called him on the spot.
Correct.
But the interesting thing about that was because that was pretty much, and the subject was what's your take on the need for repairing race relations in our communities based on that was the subject of that part of the debate. And of course, that came to the forefront in the debate because of the ongoing, continuing killings of unarmed black men in our society across the country. It's not just Carolinas. It's not just Texas, Houston, Texas. It's not just Milwaukee. The latest one is California. You got that story on?
I didn't pull that one up, but at least that one female officer who was, I guess, Shelby. Her name is Shelby.
The Oklahoma shooting?
Yeah. Charged with manslaughter now.
Yes.
And so that was sort of something we haven't seen that often, where we actually have an immediate charge instead of grand jury, no charge. Now we have a manslaughter charge. Now she has to fight it. It's not like we're trying to get a charge, because in that case, the worst thing he might have done is stick his hand through the top of a window. And even that's in dispute. But there was no reason for the firepower.
The videos of these shootings so far have basically not been favorable to the police officers so far.
Right.
The one in the Carolinas, in South Carolina, the Charleston, where the man may have had a book in his hand or may have had a gun in his hand.
Right.
Nobody's seen the definitive video.
Right.
His family.
That's terribly cloudy.
Basically said he's waiting for his son to come home from school.
Right.
So she says he's reading a book. That's not a gun. Well, we won't know till we see it. But the fact that these people just keep firing these guns all the time is just unconscionable. The El Cajon, California story that I just saw today, because guess what? It just happened like 2 days ago, or September 26th, something to that effect. So we're airing on October, 3rd, whatever, the first couple of days. It's just a few days ago. A woman calls the police.
Right.
In distress, saying her brother is having a mental problem. She needs help. Could they send somebody to help her? They don't respond right away on the mental health call, but they do send cops with guns. And there's a very interesting. Let me see if I can call that story up.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up myself. But like you said, it was a call for an assistance, and look how it turns out. I mean, the police were called in intentionally because she had some. It
was a 9. They actually have a number for it. It's a 5150 or something type call.
Okay.
When the police are dispatching the response team, knowing that there's a mentally disturbed person.
Okay, so the call itself identifies.
The call, yes, they know
mental stress situation.
They know that it's a mental stress situation. So they come and their first report is he was acting erratically. He was acting erratically and not obeying commands.
Right.
But her response was, but when you came, you knew he was mentally disturbed. So where was the rest of the response team? Because they actually have assigned to those departments
trained officers?
Yeah, it's called, the acronym is PERT, which is Psychiatric Evaluation Response Team or something to that effect.
Okay.
PERT is the acronym. Victim's sister says that she called for someone to come help her brother, but police shot him instead. That's basically the opening of this summary of the story on the route. Because the route, yes, a 5150 call, that's the actual numerical designation for the call when you're talking about a person under distress. And it's defined as when a person, as a result of mental disorder, is a danger to himself, herself, or others, gravely disabled, a peace officer, a member of the attending staff, or another professional person designated by the county may, with probable cause, take the person into custody, place him or her in a facility for a 72-hour treatment evaluation.
Okay.
The police knew that was a 5150 call, right? El Cajon police confirmed that the Psychiatric Emergency Response Team, that's the PERT acronym, was not brought in to assist on the call.
Okay, that's
bad. Now, later on it says they were not available at the time.
Okay.
But so they weren't available. So does that mean that the cops who show up
but they should. Yeah,
should show up planning to shoot him. But they don't have their psychiatric team with them.
But obviously they should have been fully aware of what was of the situation, even though they're not experts in handling it. At least they would have understood.
They
what was
knew
going
in that it was a mental health. This particular young lady writes this story this way. This is what we know. Police indicated they knew they were responding to someone in mental and or physical distress based on what police told media and information gleaned from the police scanner audio. The mental health emergency response team in place for these situations was not on the scene to assist. Olango was unarmed. Olango is dead. That's how she summarizes this report.
That's impressive.
The El Cajon Police Department released a still image to prove Olango was a threat. And the still image shows 2 police officers on one side, him in front of a pickup truck, And this still photo, he has something in his hand like this, and I'm using this pen, so
Right.
they could have interpreted that as a gun. What we're hearing is that it's an electronic cigarette.
Right,
Okay.
a vaping device, as they
Right,
called it.
whatever they called it. All right, so this is the still that they released.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any video. Actually, I do believe there's some video.
But not, yeah.
Because
And just for the,
here's what I remember reading.
okay, we have about 3 minutes.
There was cell phone video from a nearby eatery
Okay.
of some sort, and the police actually
Released it?
no.
Okay. It's always good to have that.
The entire shooting was
independent-
captured on mobile phone video from the drive-thru at the Los Panchos restaurant on NBC restaurant.
Okay.
Dave Summers said, and he's a reporter at NBC7, El Cajon lieutenant told him the restaurant worker voluntarily turned over the phone. Voluntarily turned the phone.
Okay.
The video at some point in this investigation will be released. Maria, an employee at Los Panchos in El Cajon, said police came into the restaurant, took all cell phones from employees
Oh my
after the
goodness.
shooting. They told employees not to talk to anyone, according to Maria.
Wow.
NBC7 has not confirmed how many phones were confiscated.
No, see, that's bad.
Okay?
See?
So now we have serious doubts
Right.
about what's going to show up on these cell phone videos.
Right.
And what's but
They're
anyway,
going-
this is why
Something tells me a fat finger is going to be applied to a lot of these videos.
We
and they're gonna
got
disappear.
us a problem. I tell you, this. How dare they confiscate those phones?
Quick tip to citizen journalists.
You do not have to.
Yeah, exactly. You do not have to turn over your phone.
You do not have to turn over your cell phones to any law enforcement agency.
No.
Period. If you're not involved in any crime that they're investigating.
Right.
And as a bystander in that restaurant with your phone, you can say thanks, but no thanks. I'll keep my phone.
And you are free to film it, and you're free to keep it.
Yes.
And
you may turn it over as
you
part of
just
their
explained.
investigation
Right.
if they request it, but you can keep it, do with it as you will, including turn it over to the news media.
Exactly.
Which
Precisely.
I recommend. I don't know whether we're down to 2 minutes, but
I'll take a time check, but we're getting down to about a minute or so.
okay. So
Yeah, about
look,
50 seconds.
there are any number of similar stories of police shootings that we would actually love to get to.
Right.
I'll read the headlines. Pennsylvania officer loses 2 jobs after Snapchat post. I am the law today. Now,
Right.
that's a headline
Right.
worth reading.
Right.
North Carolina officer fired
No,
over
I am-
controversial Facebook post.
I am the law today, N-word. Yeah.
N-word,
Yes.
right? Parking while black. Oh, geez, that's a story we need to read, but don't have time.
15.
Listen, this has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony
Catch us on YouTube.
at Media Watch EVT.
Thanks, M&N, for use of your facilities. Thanks, EVT Educational Productions, for use of your personnel. And
Yes.
we'll catch you the next time.